an arrogant businessman, believes he can humiliate his pregnant wife in front of everyone at Madrid's airport. A simple flight delay, or perhaps a prepared destiny. He doesn't know who he's messing with, because among the passengers appears a flight captain, who is no stranger. He is the father she thought she had lost, and the owner of the airline. What follows is a battle of pride, power, and dignity, where a single word spoken aloud changes the course of everything. Believe me, you won't see the end coming until we live it together in this story. Tell us where you are listening from, and what time you are sharing this moment. Leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you. In the hustle and bustle of a Friday afternoon at Madrid Barajas Airport, a young pregnant woman is carrying something heavier than her suitcase, a secret that no one suspects. Clara Martin had arrived hand in hand with her husband, but from the first step inside the terminal, it was clear that it was more of a controlled march than a shared stroll. He strode forward, talking on the phone in a low tone, with business phrases in English and words entangled in figures, and she followed him with a slower pace, forced by the weight of her 7-month belly. The echo of the announcements over the loudspeaker, the wheels of the suitcases, and the smell of freshly ground coffee formed the backdrop for a scene that, for many passengers, would have gone unnoticed. However, Clara already felt that something was being prepared that afternoon, as if the delay of their flight was not just a matter of schedules, but a warning that her life was about to change. Clara always thought her life looked perfect from the outside, but that afternoon, it will begin to crack in front of everyone. She had learned to keep a serene face at gala dinners, at conferences where her husband talked about investments, in the photographs that appeared in society magazines. But beneath the surface of expensive dresses and luxury trips, she knew loneliness all too well. As she walked through Terminal 4, she watched a family laughing at a cafe counter. The children asked for hot chocolate with churros, and the waiter served them with a cheerful voice. Just coffee and 2 beers. That everyday scene hit her hard, reminding her that normalcy could be full of simple affection, something she lacked in her own home. Clara's goal at that moment was as simple as it was unattainable: to get to the boarding gate without provoking Alvaro's anger. He, Alvaro Gomez, a 38-year-old businessman, walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to no one contradicting him. He wore an impeccable suit, a shiny steel watch, and a cold expression. From time to time, he turned his head towards Clara with a gesture of impatience, as if every second of delay was a personal insult. Clara caressed her belly to calm the baby girl who was moving inside her. The little being seemed to protest against the forced pace of the adult who was guiding her. The boarding lounge was full of people looking for seats in the rows of plastic chairs. The May weather provided a warm, sticky air, and many travelers fanned themselves with their boarding passes. Some took the opportunity to check their cell phones. Others ordered tapas and refreshments at nearby bars. Clara and Alvaro headed to the waiting area in front of Gate 2. There, the constant murmur mixed with the metallic sound of luggage carts. She sank into a chair, exhausted. He remained standing for a few moments, checking emails on his mobile. Clara maintained a prudent silence. She knew that any word could be interpreted as a complaint. However, a whirlwind of thoughts was brewing inside her. She looked at the luminous screens that announced destinations: Paris, Rome, Lisbon, cities that evoked memories of trips where she smiled for the cameras, while inside she wanted to escape. She wondered how she had gotten there, to that golden cage where every gesture was watched. The pregnancy made her more aware of her fragility, but it also gave her a strange strength. Alvaro interrupted her thoughts with a dry tone. "Clara, sit up straight. Don't slouch." She straightened her back, obediently. A small child nearby watched the scene, and then hid his face in his mother's shoulder. Clara smiled faintly at the child, as if asking for a silent complicity. The mother returned a look of pity. Clara looked away, feeling the heat of shame. Alvaro returned to his mobile, ignoring what was happening around him. The first scene of tension occurred when she stopped in front of a magazine display. A cover showed a young woman with a baby in her arms. Clara stood still for a few seconds. Alvaro, without stopping his phone call, reached out his hand and motioned for her to follow. His abrupt gesture caused her to trip on the armrest of a chair. Several passengers looked up, surprised. She quickly recovered, murmuring, "I'm fine." No one responded, but some remained watching with curiosity. The baby in her womb gave a strong kick, just as Alvaro ordered her to hurry up. The contrast was brutal. His voice sounded like a cold command, and inside her body, a life was claiming its own space. Clara tenderly caressed her belly, murmuring in silence, "Easy, little one." That movement was a revelation for her, as if the being inside her was reminding her that she should not always be silent. A loudspeaker interrupted the murmur with a metallic voice. Passengers on Flight 847 to Barcelona are informed that, due to scheduling reasons, boarding is delayed by approximately 1 hour. We apologize for the inconvenience. The announcement fell like a bucket of cold water on Alvaro. He frowned, cursed under his breath, and put his mobile in his pocket. For Clara, however, those words were an ambiguous signal. They meant staying trapped longer with him. But they also prolonged the public exposure, a space where perhaps she would not be so alone. An older passenger commented to his wife, "I saw it coming. With the May bank holiday, it's always the same." Both laughed resignedly as they took out a Tupperware with Spanish omelet and olives. Clara looked at the scene with nostalgia. She remembered the simple lunches at her grandmother's house in Toledo, when she still felt part of a warm family. Alvaro, on the other hand, stared at the horizon, calculating the impact of the delay on his schedule. The time in the waiting room began to stretch. Travelers took out sandwiches wrapped in aluminum foil, ordered refreshments, and talked in low voices. A woman approached the counter and asked for a lime blossom tea to calm her nerves. The smell of toasted bread and freshly brewed coffee permeated the atmosphere. Clara closed her eyes for a few seconds and took a deep breath, trying to capture that air of normalcy. She felt that something, deep down, was about to change. A loudspeaker announces a delay on their flight to Barcelona, forcing them to remain together longer at the airport. A quiet argument turns into an uncomfortable spectacle as the eyes of strangers begin to turn towards the couple. Clara had tried to stay calm, sitting in the row of plastic chairs in front of the boarding gate, with her hand on her belly as if she could protect her daughter. Alvaro, standing beside her, kept checking his watch and grumbling under his breath. The announced delay irritated him more than anything else, and his bad mood was inevitably directed at her. The flight delay becomes the catalyst for a tension that Clara can no longer hide. She shifted slightly to get comfortable, and the gesture was enough for him to raise his voice. "Clara, please sit up straight. Don't make a scene." Several heads turned immediately. A group of young people eating ham sandwiches looked at each other with a mocking gesture, murmuring under their breath about the man in the suit's attitude. A middle-aged woman, with 2 small children, looked down at her mobile, although her curious eyes kept watching what was happening. The goal of that moment, at least for Clara, was not to attract attention, but every word from Alvaro seemed to attract it like a magnet to the center of all eyes. Clara felt her heart race. The baby in her womb was stirring forcefully. She felt trapped between the desire to maintain discretion and the need to respond, but she knew that speaking could trigger more tension. Alvaro looked at her with cold eyes, pressing his lips together. The plastic seating area in front of Gate B2 was charged with murmurs and nerves. The air conditioning seemed insufficient, and people fanned themselves with duty-free shop brochures. Some passengers consulted their mobiles to see if news of the delay was already circulating on social media. The sound of a coffee machine preparing espressos could be heard, and the aroma spread through the space, mixing with that of homemade sandwiches that several families had brought. Everything seemed normal in an airport on the eve of a long weekend, except for the spotlight that was beginning to fall on Clara and Alvaro. The characters present were clear. Clara, increasingly uneasy, caressed her belly and looked around with a timid hope for support. Alvaro, annoyed at being watched, tried hard to maintain his composure, but the vein in his neck betrayed him. And a few feet away, a man in a dark blue vest and a folder in his hand approached with a firm step. Tomas Delgado, a security supervisor. The scene's development accelerated. Alvaro made an abrupt gesture towards Clara to sit up straight, almost pushing her against the backrest. Several passengers raised their eyebrows, and a woman murmured, "Poor girl." At that very moment, Tomas arrived at the scene. In a serene voice, he asked, "Is everything all right here, ma'am?" Clara looked at him with wide eyes, and for a second, she thought of answering with the truth. She felt tears welling up, but she held them back. Alvaro reacted with an arrogant smile. "Nothing's wrong, officer. My wife is tired, and with the pregnancy she gets uncomfortable quickly." Tomas did not take his eyes off Clara, as if he knew that the real answer had to come from her. Clara looked down at the floor, unable to articulate a word. Several people were already taking out their mobiles to record, convinced that something extraordinary was happening. The point of tension came when Alvaro, annoyed by the insistence, raised his voice. "I said nothing's wrong!" His voice echoed in the room and caused a momentary silence. Clara felt a knot in her throat, the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Everyone expected someone else to speak. It was then that Tomas, with absolute calm, repeated the question, looking only at Clara. "Ma'am, do you need help?" Alvaro smiled with arrogance and replied that nothing's wrong. But Clara's look towards Tomas revealed a contained cry for help. No one heard it aloud, but it was there, in her glistening eyes, in the trembling of her hands. Tomas understood and stayed a few steps away, like an invisible guardian. Suddenly, a pilot in uniform stops near the gate, watching the scene with a serious expression. The navy blue jacket and the embroidered surname on the pocket caught the attention of several curious onlookers. The pilot spoke with a flight attendant, and although he seemed focused on the flight preparations, he couldn't hide that he was looking toward the couple. Clara noticed him. A shiver ran down her spine, as if that figure belonged to a memory she had tried to forget. In the rows of seats, comments multiplied. An elderly couple murmured that these things were not seen in public before. A group of students took discreet photos and commented that this is going viral. Meanwhile, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of discomfort and expectation. The flight delay was no longer the only thing being talked about. Alvaro, trying to regain ground, ordered Clara in a lower tone, "Stop looking at people. Behave yourself." She swallowed, unable to respond. The baby in her womb moved forcefully again, as if she also felt the tension. Clara put her hand on her belly, seeking serenity. At that moment, Tomas leaned slightly towards Clara, speaking to her with respect. "Ma'am, if at any time you want to talk to me, I'll be nearby." She just nodded her head, a minimal gesture, but enough to show that she was not completely alone. Alvaro noticed the exchange, gritted his teeth, and took out his mobile again to call someone, perhaps a lawyer or an assistant. The digital clock above the boarding gate continued to tick away, minutes that seemed eternal. Clara watched the other passengers. Some were entertained with magazines. Others were snacking on olives and Spanish omelet in a Tupperware. That normalcy was strangely comforting to her, like a reminder that everyday life still existed beyond her problems. The atmosphere remained tense, but Clara felt that something was changing. The pilot who had stopped nearby was still there, talking in a low voice with the flight attendant. His gestures were calm, although his gaze was directed at the couple again and again. Clara began to feel that this man, a stranger to the rest, had a role she did not yet understand in her own story. Suddenly, a pilot in uniform stops near the gate, watching the scene with a serious expression. A navy blue uniform, a surname embroidered on the jacket, and a gaze that awakens memories Clara thought were buried. She stood still, watching the straight back of the pilot who was talking with a flight attendant next to the boarding gate. Her heart was beating fast, as if each beat reminded her of childhood scenes. The murmur of the airport seemed to fade in that instant, and only that figure remained, which turned little by little, revealing a face marked by the years, but unmistakable to her. The pilot who has just appeared is not a stranger. His mere presence stirs something deep within Clara. She swallowed, feeling her throat close up. Alvaro continued to argue in a low voice with Tomas, the security supervisor, annoyed by the unwanted attention. But Clara barely listened. Her mind traveled to another time, to a patio in Seville, where a man in uniform lifted her into his arms before leaving forever. The possibility that that memory would come to life there, in the middle of a room full of strangers, shook her from head to toe. The goal of that moment was no longer to endure the flight delay or her husband's irritation, but to face an unexpected reunion that would turn her world upside down. Julian Ortega, the pilot with the intense gaze, had just entered the scene unintentionally. Clara stared at him, her fingers clenched on the plastic seat, unable to decide whether to get up or hide. The boarding gate was lit with white lights, reflected on the polished floor. The screens announced a new delay, and the passengers sighed with resignation. Some children ran down the aisle, laughing while their parents called them with patience. An elderly couple commented that on the long weekend, there were always delays, and that it wasn't worth getting angry. In that atmosphere charged with waiting and boredom, the appearance of a flight captain with a solemn demeanor added an unexpected note of solemnity. The characters aligned clearly. Clara, surprised, with a mix of fear and hope. Julian, about 60 years old, his face furrowed with lines of responsibility and experience, had not yet fully realized her presence. Alvaro, irritated by the distraction that man was causing, continued with an arrogant gesture, unable to understand the emotional current that was beginning to emerge. Tomas remained attentive, watching how the tension could explode at any moment. The plot progression unfolded in several brief scenes. First, Clara observed Julian's profile, and a memory struck her mind. The train station where she saw him leave when she was 12. She remembered the broken promise, the letters that never arrived. Second, Julian exchanged a few words with a flight attendant about boarding times, but his eyes strayed for an instant to Clara. She tensed, knowing the connection was inevitable. Third, Alvaro, not grasping the emotional storm, stepped forward towards Tomas to protest in an increasingly loud tone about the flight delay, raising the volume of the discussion. The moment of greatest intensity came when Julian's and Clara's eyes met. It was a fleeting flash, but charged with recognition. Clara felt the air escape her. The features of that man, hardened by time, were the same ones she had memorized in her childhood. Julian frowned, surprised, and stopped in his tracks for an instant. The possibility of error vanished. He was looking at his daughter. After 18 years of distance, Julian recognizes Clara. A flash of surprise and pain crosses his face, as if the past had returned all at once. He remained silent, but took a step forward, leaving the flight attendant mid-sentence. Clara shrank in her seat, fearful of Alvaro's reaction. The baby in her womb stirred, as if responding to that emotional discharge. Clara murmured to herself, "It's him," her voice broken. Alvaro did not hear, busy in his discussion with the supervisor, raising his voice more and more, accusing the security staff of incompetence. The scene was tensing for two different reasons. On one hand, the open conflict between Alvaro and the airport authority. On the other, the emotional implosion that Clara was experiencing upon reuniting with her father. In the lounge, several passengers began to take photos and videos. Some whispered among themselves, "That man in the suit is out of control." Others, more discreet, commented that the captain seemed uncomfortable with the situation. The atmosphere filled with an uneasy anticipation. Clara looked around, wondering if it was real, if it wasn't just a dream caused by exhaustion and anxiety. But the intensity of Julian's gaze cleared any doubt. Suddenly, Clara felt a tingling in her eyes, tears that struggled to come out. She remembered her father's voice telling her as a child that she would be good if he stayed. She remembered how she saw him leave with a suitcase, how her mother was silent for days afterward. That wound, which never closed, was reopening in the middle of a crowded airport. Julian seemed equally affected, unable to hide the trembling of his lips. Clara murmurs to herself, "It's him," as Alvaro begins to argue with security more and more haughtily. A murmur runs through the boarding lounge when the arrogant businessman raises his voice against airport security. The tension accumulated in previous chapters reaches a point where Clara can no longer go unnoticed. She slowly sits up, with her hand on her belly, trying to find a posture that relieves the pressure on her back. She breathes slowly, as if each inhalation sought to calm the baby moving inside her body. Alvaro, standing tall, and with his mobile still in his hand, looks around with a mixture of annoyance and arrogance. He notices people's eyes, but interprets them as a recognition of his importance, not as a silent alert. The loudspeaker repeats the flight delay to Barcelona again. The metallic echo of the public address system seems to add another layer of impatience to the already charged air. The waiting lounge in front of gate B12 has a white sheen on the polished floor. The rows of plastic chairs are occupied and vacated as the minutes pass. A cart with drinks stops nearby, and the dry clink of bottles on ice sounds. It smells of coffee and toasted bread, of cold Spanish omelet that an older couple shares with patience. Clara observes small, everyday gestures that give human warmth to the environment. A child hugs his stuffed animal. A woman closes her eyes and listens to a song. Two friends laugh at a badly told joke. Those details sustain her inside. They help her not to break when Alvaro's voice rises again. Alvaro demands to speak to someone of a higher rank. His phrase comes out sharp, like a command. "I want the person in charge, the boss's boss." Tomás Delgado, with a blue vest and a folder that he opens and closes with a steady hand, maintains a serene tone. He explains the airport protocol, the need for respect, and the priority of safety. Alvaro raises an eyebrow and smiles with a sharpness that intends to humiliate. He asks if Tomás understands who he is, if he knows how much time he is losing, if he doesn't care about first-class clients. The surroundings shrink into an expectant silence. Several people turn on their phone cameras, and hold their breath to record without trembling. Clara feels a stronger heartbeat in her belly, a jolt that makes her look at the floor for a second. She closes her eyes and counts to 5, then opens them and straightens her back. The intimate purpose of that gesture is simple: to hold herself together. She doesn't want to be dragged into the whirlwind of humiliation, or by the avalanche of voices that can crush her and seed. People watch, commenting in low voices. Some wonder if they should intervene. The line between private and public has been erased, and everyone walks on that edge. Suddenly, among the figures circulating in the boarding area, a uniform with captain's stripes appears. The presence attracts a different authority, one that does not need to be shouted. Julian Ortega takes 1, 2 steps forward. His voice, when he introduces himself, does not seek to compete with Alvaro's. It simply displaces it. "Good afternoon. I am the captain of this flight," he says naturally. He greets Tomas with a brief, professional gesture and looks at the passengers with respect. The tone changes, as if someone had opened a window and fresh air had come in. Alvaro tries to regain focus on the situation. He turns to Julian with a rehearsed coldness and repeats his demand. He asks for privileges, asks for an immediate solution. "My schedule does not allow for delays," he says, and in that plural he doesn't pronounce, the world that sustains him is inferred. Secretaries, drivers, meetings, signatures. Julian listens without haste, without showing subservience. He explains that the safety and order of boarding do not depend on a whim, that everyone, including him, must adjust to the protocol. Some glances nod in agreement. A whisper of approval runs through the line. Julian's gaze, then, falls on Clara, not out of curiosity, but out of deep recognition. Both their eyes hold a silent thread that vibrates with the past. He doesn't name it, he doesn't confirm it, but the most attentive passengers perceive something different. A captain who doesn't just look at a passenger, a man who recognizes a face and receives it with intimate respect. Clara holds that gaze for just a second, then releases it as if someone touches a flame and pulls their hand away so as not to get burned. However, the heat has remained inside. It illuminates corners of her memory that she thought were closed. One of the young men waiting for the flight opens a box of churros with chocolate and offers it to those around him. The kind gesture breaks the rigidity of the atmosphere for an instant. "Would you like one, ma'am?" he asks timidly. Clara declines with a grateful smile, and the steaming chocolate leaves an aroma that softens the scene. Several accept, and brief laughter is heard, like a relief that is shared among strangers. That thread of normalcy makes the contrast with Alvaro's voice visible, which once again tightens the rope. Tomas insists on maintaining calm. His posture conveys calm firmness, a figure accustomed to dealing with human turbulence. "I ask you to moderate your tone," he indicates without hesitation. He reminds them that there are families, children, elderly people, and that respect is the basis of any journey. Alvaro replies with a disdainful gesture, his chin raised. He seems to test how far he can stretch his authority. The lounge watches that tense rope. It is no longer just a couple in conflict. It is a man measuring himself against common norms. Julian takes a lateral step, neither invasive nor distant. He places his presence between the noise and the people. "We thank you for your patience," he says to the whole group. He informs them that boarding will be organized by rows as soon as they are authorized, that the delay is operational and does not allow for shortcuts. Some clap softly, others put down their mobiles, as if the simple recognition had already taken away fuel from the arrogance. Clara breathes more deeply, looks at Julian out of the corner of her eye. She perceives that his confidence gives her space, as if a door were opening behind her. The advance of the scene reaches its climax when Alvaro, annoyed by the loss of the center, takes another step and again demands priority. His voice rises a half tone. He brings up a name, mentions contacts, threatens to complain in writing. At that instant, a passenger who has been recording since the first friction stops doing so and speaks with clarity. His voice is not aggressive, but it is firm. A stone that falls into still water. A passenger records the scene and comments out loud, "That man pushed his pregnant wife. We all have it on video." The atmosphere turns against Alvaro. The phrase circulates like lightning. Some who had not seen anything ask. Others confirm with a gesture. Alvaro is speechless for a second, then tries to regain his composure. But arrogance no longer serves him. Tomas, with calm, stands between him and Clara. He reminds him that any complaint can be channeled appropriately, that there are procedures and witnesses. Clara feels that the ground stops tilting. She does not need to speak yet. The silence of the room speaks for her. Julian maintains his serenity, without theatricality. His gaze returns to Clara, and in that exchange there is a simple message. Be careful. Closeness. A silent promise of protection. Helena Morales, the flight attendant, appears in the distance, checking boarding lists, and when Clara sees her, she perceives another island of safety, small but sufficient. The lounge holds its breath. For the first time, the balance does not tilt to the side of the loudest force. Clara places both hands on the armrest. She feels a slight kick from the baby. She imagines the warmth of a soft blanket, a glass of water, a quiet seat. Julian takes a step forward and asks in a low voice, "Are you sure, Mrs. Martin, that you want to continue like this?" A heavy silence falls over the lounge. Everyone awaits Clara's response, but her lips tremble. She remains with her gaze fixed on the shiny floor of the terminal, as if she could find there the strength to utter words that would change the course of her life. The murmur of the passengers subsides little by little, leaving a space that amplifies every breath, every sigh. Julian Ortega, in his impeccable uniform, remains standing a few steps away, watching with a mixture of expectation and contained emotion. Alvaro Gomez, on the other hand, leans forward, his eyes burning with anger and disbelief, not imagining that the ground beneath his feet is about to crumble. The memory of Julian's gaze haunts her. In her mind, the voice of a father who left still resonates. Clara clenches her hands against the armrest of the seat. She doesn't know whether to say that forbidden name in public. She doesn't know whether to expose a secret kept for so many years. The baby in her womb gives another strong kick, as if pushing her towards the truth. Then, in a whisper that barely manages to escape her throat, Clara says, "Dad." The collective murmur erupts like a wave. Several passengers exchange surprised glances. Others turn their heads from side to side to make sure they heard correctly. Tomas Delgado, the supervisor, blinks with an incredulous look. Alvaro straightens up, perplexed, and demands in a harsh voice, "What did you say, Clara?" She doesn't respond, with tears about to burst forth. Julian doesn't take his eyes off his daughter. He doesn't need words to confirm the obvious. The goal of this moment is no longer to hide the tension, but to reveal the family bond between Julian and Clara, and to expose Alvaro. Captain Ortega takes a step forward. He approaches with solemn calm and says, "We have known each other for many years." He doesn't specify anything else, but the tone of his voice, full of emotion, makes it clear to everyone that there is a deep history between them. Clara lowers her head, unable to hold the gaze of the curious. The waiting lounge, with screens that continue to announce delays, and with passengers who until recently were yawning, has become a theatrical stage. Some raise their mobiles higher, convinced they are recording an extraordinary moment. Alvaro, furious, clenches his fists. His face alternates between surprise, rage, and fear. He tries to maintain his composure, but his world of absolute control begins to totter. Alvaro demands an explanation, his voice resonating with a sharpness that used to command respect. "Explain it right now," he orders. Clara shrinks, not knowing what to say. Julian intervenes with serenity. "I don't think this is the place for details, Mr. Gomez de la Vega." The tone of his voice contains a quiet authority that disarms Alvaro's momentum. Tomas observes in silence, taking mental note of every gesture, as if he knows that this scene will have formal consequences. The progression of the moment reaches a new point. When Julian reveals his position with clarity, Alvaro, seeking to regain control, states that he is the only one who can guarantee Clara's safety and well-being, that he will not allow any interference. Julian interrupts him softly, without raising his voice. "I remind you that I am not only the captain of this flight, but also the owner of the airline." The phrase falls like thunder in the room. The passengers look at each other, stunned. The mobile cameras capture every word. Clara feels the ground move beneath her feet. Suddenly, the man she thought she had lost her whole life appears not only as a father figure, but as someone with real power to protect her. The climax is reached when Alvaro's arrogance turns into disbelief. His face pales, then turns red. He shakes his head from side to side, unable to take it all in. His lips open, but he finds no words. The contrast is brutal. A man who always believed himself invincible is now overcome by an unexpected truth, and by a rival with greater authority and resources. Clara, with tears on her cheeks, slowly gets up from the chair. The room erupts in whispers, as if the scene had become a collective spectacle. Spanish cultural context seeps into the scene. An older woman comments in a low voice, "This looks like a Madrid Sainette." Another passenger adds, "With so many delays, at least we have entertainment." Amidst comments and nervous laughter, the family drama unfolds in front of them as if it were part of the trip. Clara takes a step forward, her breathing ragged. She looks at Julian, then at Alvaro, and finally at Tomas. No one interrupts her. The baby in her womb moves with energy, as if confirming that this was the time to no longer be silent. The tears run freely, but they are no longer just tears of fear but of liberation. Clara, with contained tears, slowly gets up from the chair, while all the mobiles point at her. For the first time in years, Clara feels that she is not alone. A figure from the past has placed himself at her side, ready to stand up for her. Julian's deep voice still resonates in the room, floating among the passengers' murmurs and the metallic echo of the public address system that insists on reminding them of the delay. Clara remains standing, her trembling hands resting on her belly, while everyone's eyes watch her with expectation. Alvaro, rigid, his face flushed with humiliation, tries to recompose his mask of a powerful man, although his nerves are betrayed by the trembling of his hands. The revelation of the previous chapter forces everyone to reevaluate the pieces. Husband, father, daughter, each with their role. Clara feels that the forces governing her life are suddenly reordering themselves. Her father, whom she thought she had lost forever, now stands with authority in front of a husband who until a moment ago believed himself to be invincible. The baby in her womb gives another kick, as if responding to that invisible transformation in which a woman's voice is raised after years of silence. The immediate goal is clear: to mark a change in the dynamic. Julian, with a serene but firm voice, tells the passengers that boarding will not begin until the situation is resolved. Tomás Delgado, the security supervisor, nods in approval. Alvaro protests, raising his voice. He cannot delay a flight for a simple whim. Julian looks him in the eye without getting flustered. This plane will not move until all passengers are safe. That includes Mrs. Martin. The attention shifts to the boarding ramp. Passengers slowly stand up. Some move forward with carry-on bags. Others wait standing, attentive to the scene. The cold light of the spotlights reflects on the metallic floor of the tunnel that connects the lounge to the plane. The murmur of the people creates a sense of anticipation, as if everyone knows they are witnessing something more important than a flight delay. Clara walks with hesitant steps, accompanied closely by Julian. He doesn't touch her, but his presence conveys silent support. Alvaro approaches quickly, trying to talk in private. "Clara, this should not be resolved here. Come with me." Tomás blocks his path with a discreet movement. "Mr. Gomez, any conversation must be held in public." Alvaro frowns, stifles an insult, and backs away a few steps, trying to regain his composure. Helena Morales, the flight attendant, appears on the ramp with professional calm. She holds a folder and offers a kind smile to Clara. "Ma'am, follow me. We will seat you in a more comfortable seat." Clara feels grateful and follows her to the door of the plane. The murmur of the passengers increases when they notice the difference in treatment. Alvaro advances behind, indignant, but is held back by Julian's firm gaze. Boarding is interrupted for a few minutes, long enough for the tension to grow. Julian repeats in a clear voice, "The safety and dignity of the passengers are an absolute priority." Alvaro laughs with contempt. "Safety? Who is threatening whom here?" Julian does not respond to the provocation. Instead, he leans towards Clara and asks her softly, "Do you wish to continue this journey with him, or would you prefer to travel independently?" The silence becomes deep, broken only by the clatter of a few suitcases and the held breath of the crowd. Clara feels that the moment has arrived. For 3 years, her voice was silenced, reduced to a complacent murmur. Now, in front of her father, and in front of dozens of witnesses, she understands that she needs no more excuses. With a trembling but firm voice, she says, "I don't want to continue like this." The phrase echoes on the ramp like thunder. Several passengers applaud spontaneously. Others nod in silence. Alvaro is petrified, as if the word had pierced the armor of control with which he covered himself. The brief applause fades, but the energy of the moment remains. Clara trembles, not with fear, but with relief. Her father looks at her with contained pride. Helena offers her a seat in first class, handing her a new boarding pass. Clara holds it between her fingers, surprised to see that her husband's surname no longer appears, but her maiden name, Martin Herrera. A current of emotion runs through her body. She feels that she has recovered something lost a long time ago. A passenger comments out loud that he will miss the last AVE train to Valencia if the delay is prolonged. Another responds with resignation. That's what happens on long holidays. Everyday normalcy returns little by little, but the scene is no longer the same. Clara looks at her new boarding pass, caresses her belly, and smiles with tears in her eyes. She doesn't know what will happen in Barcelona, or what paths she will have to travel afterward, but she feels that the cage has been opened for the first time. Helena approaches, places a light hand on her shoulder and says, "You are not alone, ma'am." Clara nods, moved. She looks out of the corner of her eye at Julian, who remains firm, guarding the aisle with the calm of someone who has already made a decision. Alvaro, on the other hand, takes a step back, aware that he has lost ground to a truth more powerful than any contract or appearance. Clara, with tears of relief, slowly gets up from the chair, while all the mobiles point at her. For the first time in years, Clara feels that she is not alone. A figure from the past has placed himself at her side, ready to stand up for her. Julian's deep voice still resonates in the room, floating among the passengers' murmurs and the metallic echo of the public address system that insists on reminding them of the delay. Clara remains standing, her trembling hands resting on her belly, while everyone's eyes watch her with expectation. Alvaro, rigid, his face flushed with humiliation, tries to recompose his mask of a powerful man, although his nerves are betrayed by the trembling of his hands. The revelation of the previous chapter forces everyone to reevaluate the pieces: husband, father, daughter, each with their role. Clara feels that the forces governing her life are suddenly reordering themselves. Her father, whom she thought she had lost forever, now stands with authority in front of a husband who until a moment ago believed himself to be invincible. The baby in her womb gives another kick, as if responding to that invisible transformation in which a woman's voice is raised after years of silence. The immediate goal is clear: to mark a change in the dynamic. Julian, with a serene but firm voice, tells the passengers that boarding will not begin until the situation is resolved. Tomas Delgado, the security supervisor, nods in approval. Alvaro protests, raising his voice. He cannot delay a flight for a simple whim. Julian looks him in the eye, without getting flustered. This plane will not move until all passengers are safe. That includes Maitre Martin. The attention shifts to the boarding ramp. Passengers slowly stand up. Some move forward with carry-on bags. Others wait standing, attentive to the scene. The cold light of the spotlights reflects on the metallic floor of the tunnel that connects the lounge to the plane. The murmur of the people creates a sense of anticipation, as if everyone knows they are witnessing something more important than a flight delay. Clara walks with hesitant steps, accompanied closely by Julian. He doesn't touch her, but his presence conveys silent support. Alvaro approaches quickly, trying to talk in private. "Clara, this should not be resolved here. Come with me." Tomas blocks his path with a discreet movement. "Mr. Gomez, any conversation must be held in public." Alvaro frowns, stifles an insult, and backs away a few steps, trying to regain his composure. Helena Morales, the flight attendant, waits at the entrance of the plane with a serene smile, ready to receive the passengers and guide Clara to her new place. The plot progresses in several brief scenes that mark the transition. First, Clara hands her card to Helena, who receives it with an almost complicit gesture. "Welcome, Mrs. Martin." The phrase makes Clara swallow and nod in silence. Second, Julian exchanges a look with Helena. She understands the magnitude of what is happening and supports him with a cordial smile. Third, Alvaro tries to cut into the line, arguing that he has priority. Tomas stops him with an implacable calm, reminding him that each passenger must wait their turn. The murmur of the people turns into a chorus of small approvals, as if justice was beginning to balance the scales. The climax of this moment is concentrated in an intimate instant. Clara enters the plane and stops for a second before taking the first step into the cabin. Her eyes fall on the boarding pass. She sees her maiden name and feels that she has recovered her lost identity. Her tears are not of fear, but of relief. She repeats to herself that she is not chained, that the door has been opened. The metallic echo of the tunnel seems to become a solemn music that accompanies her in her rebirth. As Clara walks toward her seat, an older couple smiles at her and offers an animo. Cheer up. Hee-ha! This simple gesture moves her deeply. For a moment, she feels that a whole invisible community is supporting her. She responds with a thank you, barely audible, as she puts her bag in the overhead compartment with Helena's help. The cabin smells of freshly brewed coffee and clean fabrics, a warm atmosphere that contrasts with the cold tension that was left behind in the boarding lounge. As Clara closes her eyes for an instant, she hears Alvaro's voice in the background, arguing with a passenger. This will not end here. The plane is already taxiing down the runway, but in the first-class cabin, everything seems suspended between past and future. Clara settles into her wide seat, with the blanket folded over her knees, as the roar of the engines grows and vibrates beneath the floor. She feels a mixture of relief and vertigo. She breathes the fresh air coming from the ventilation, different from the heavy atmosphere of the boarding lounge. She glances at Julian, sitting in front of her, with his hands clasped and his uniform still impeccable. She finds it hard to believe that the man who abandoned her life so many years ago is now so close, sharing the same space and the same quietness. Clara remembers how, as a child, she waited for letters from her father that never arrived. Every sound of footsteps in the hallway of her house in Seville, every mailman's knock, was a frustrated hope. Now, with him in front of her, all those memories seem to return like a distant echo. Her lips tremble. She doesn't know whether to speak or wait for him to break the silence. Julian looks at her with a mixture of pride and guilt, aware that every word must be chosen carefully. The cabin atmosphere is intimate. Dim lights, darkened windows, and a silence that protects the beginning of a long-delayed conversation. The goal of this meeting is clear: to open the wounds in order to begin to close them, to confess what each one fell silent about, and to find a way to move forward. Julian understands this, and he goes first. Clara, he begins in a soft voice, I know that my presence here confuses you, but I need to tell you what I never had the courage to explain to you. She looks him directly in the eyes for the first time since they recognized each other. She feels the same mixture of pain and hope as when she was a child. The first-class cabin becomes the stage for that confession. The seats recline smoothly. The staff offers sparkling water and small trays of nuts. Helena appears briefly, places a glass on the small table, and withdraws discreetly, respecting their privacy. In the distance in economy class, some laughter and the rustle of sandwich wrappers can be heard, a reminder that everyday life continues, even though in first class everything is on hold. The central characters in that instant are two, Clara and Julian. She, with her belly agitated by the baby who seems to be listening to the conversation. He, with the tired eyes of someone who has carried years of remorse. Their gestures are unhurried, their voices low, as if the murmur of the engine accompanies each phrase. Julian begins to narrate his story. He explains that he left not because he didn't love her, but because the conflict with his mother led him to make a foolish decision. He acknowledges that the ambition to build the airline consumed him, that he hid in work to avoid facing the shame of having broken his family. Clara listens, her brow furrowed and tears held back. The progression of the dialogue follows its course. Clara, in a choked voice, responds, "You abandoned me when I needed you most." Julian lowers his gaze, accepting the blow. He admits that he tried to follow her from afar, that he discreetly hired someone to inform him about her life, that he knew about her studies, her wedding, even the first rumors that Alvaro was controlling. Clara interrupts him, hurt. "And why didn't you come? Why did you let me sink?" Julian presses his lips together. He says he didn't have the courage, that pride blinded him, that each passing year made it more difficult to return. The emotional climax comes when Julian confesses something Clara didn't expect. "When I found out about your marriage," he says in a broken voice, "I wanted to intervene. I knew that Alvaro forced you to sign an unfair prenuptial agreement that left you with nothing if you stood up to him. I wanted to stop it, but you had no contact with me, and I was afraid you would reject my help." Clara's eyes open in surprise. She never imagined that her father knew that intimate detail of her life. A tear rolls down her cheek, a mixture of rage and relief. "So you did know," she murmurs. "You did know what I was suffering." The cultural context seeps in subtly. An older passenger glances at the newspaper that has a note about inheritances in business families. Clara sees it out of the corner of her eye, and she shudders, as if the coincidence reinforced the gravity of what she is experiencing. Julian insists, "I know I can't erase the past, but I'm here now, ready to protect you, to protect your daughter." Clara clenches her hands on the blanket. The baby in her womb moves as if also claiming that promise. Helena returns for a moment to announce that later they will serve a light dinner with tapas, Spanish omelet, olives, and manchego cheese. The detail normalizes the scene, like a reminder that everything continues, that even in the middle of a family confession, life continues to offer small Spanish customs. Clara thanks her for the gesture. She takes a sip of sparkling water and discreetly wipes away her tears. Clara, with tears, murmurs, "You abandoned me when I needed you most." Julian, with a broken voice, replies, "I know, daughter, and I have never forgiven myself." The silence is filled with the hum of the engine and the beats she feels in her chest. The loudspeaker announces light turbulence, and Clara holds Julian's hand without thinking. An abrupt movement of the plane awakens something more than fear. It revives in Clara the memory of all the times she fell. The movement lifts the trays a few millimeters, makes the glasses vibrate, and causes a murmur of unease that passes through the cabin in the form of sighs. Clara clenches the armrests, breathes slowly, and looks at Julian, who keeps his seatbelt fastened and his eyes on her, as if with his gaze he wants to anchor her to the present. The lights are dim. In the window, only dense shadows can be seen. The plane, now stabilized at a cruising altitude, returns to its constant hum, and that mechanical music, repeated and uniform, allows Clara's heart to regain its rhythm. The contact with her father in the turbulence opens the door to a more sincere and liberating conversation. His gesture, his hand nearby without being overbearing, the way he waits for her to find the words, all that melts a layer of ice that had been attached to Clara's throat for years. She remembers the terminal cafeteria, the Spanish omelet in a Tupperware of an older couple, the churros shared among strangers, and she feels that, like those simple scenes, her life could return to the everyday, to the warmth. If she dares to say what she never said, Clara's goal now is to name her fear, to tell it unadorned, with the serenity of someone who finally knows she is not alone. "It wasn't a scream," she says in a low voice. "It was the tone, the way everything had to be done the way he wanted." She looks at her hands, notices the trembling that still visits her. "He didn't let me handle money. He said it was normal in a marriage. He asked me for my passwords. He checked my mobile. He told me not to go out alone, that something might happen to me." Julian listens in silence. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't correct. He just nods with slight movements. Through the aisle, a flight attendant collects empty glasses and leaves a small pitcher of water on the central table, a gesture that provides a domestic calm. The environment accompanies that openness. Some passengers are sleeping with their necks tilted. Others are glancing at the in-flight magazine, flipping pages with photos of beaches and European cities. The soft click of seatbelts unfastening sounds when the pilot turns off the warning sign. An older woman, on her way to the bathroom, stops next to the first-class seats and asks if they can bring her a lime blossom tea. She comments that on night flights it's good for her stomach. Helena discreetly appears, notes the request, and asks Clara if she wants sparkling water or an extra blanket. Her professional, cordial tone makes the cabin look for a moment like a living room lit by table lamps. The characters establish their roles. Clara breathes better with each phrase. She feels that the baby in her womb responds with softer movements, as if listening to her. Julian, with his back against the backrest and his hands clasped, lets his daughter set the pace. In economy class, far from that island of quiet, Alvaro sends messages non-stop. His screen throws out blue flashes that reach the eyes of a sleepy passenger who turns and sighs. The contrast between cabins highlights how the tension, although contained, has not completely disappeared. The plot progresses in scenes that are linked without haste. First, Clara returns to the recent past. When I found out about the pregnancy, he feigned joy, but he immediately started deciding for me. What doctor, what comfortable clothes, what visits I could receive. He told me I didn't need to see my friends, that I would get tired. I was left alone, Dad. I was ashamed to tell you. Julian tilts his head, swallows, and says in a low voice, I'm sorry. Second, Clara confesses another detail. Sometimes he spoke to me like a child. He would tell me that I didn't understand business, that it was a good thing he was there to put the house in order. In public, he would smile. At home, the silence was very heavy. Third, Julian leaned slightly toward her. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me now. I just want you to know that I will not turn away again. A slight vibration runs through the structure, as a reminder that the sky also moves. The flight attendant returns with the lime blossom tea for the older passenger. She places the steaming cup down carefully and offers Clara a small plate of manchego cheese and olives. Thank you, Clara whispers, who is not hungry, but she takes a bite and discovers that the salty taste brings her back to her body. Inside, a question begins to take shape. What will her daughter's life be like if she takes this step towards autonomy? The emotional climax arises without raising her voice, as happens with truths that have matured in silence. Clara says, I want a different life for my daughter. I don't want her to learn to be silent. I don't want her to believe that love is blind obedience. She looks at Julian, and in her gaze there is a decision. He inhales deeply. He sees in that phrase the missing spark, the affirmation that once uttered cannot be taken back. Julian, moved, promises her, you will not be alone again, neither you nor she. The phrase, spoken without solemnity, floats like a warm blanket. Clara receives it with moist eyes, closes her eyelids for an instant, and, for the first time in a long time, feels at rest. The atmosphere is filled with small certainties. A passenger yawns and stretches his legs. Another points out a sea of clouds that looks like snow through the window. Helena appears to ask if they prefer to have dinner now or later. She comments that the proposal includes Spanish omelet, bread with tomato, and some hot croquettes. Julian asks for it to be served later, that they wish to continue talking. Helena nods with a half smile and withdraws. In the aisle, the metal cart advances without haste, leaving a trail of toasted bread smell that softens any rough edges. Clara, with a now serene voice, explains that after landing, she will want to spend the night at a friend's house in Barcelona, that she does not intend to accompany Alvaro to any event. "I want to sleep somewhere quiet," she says, "and tomorrow I will call a lawyer friend of my cousin's." Julian nods, his gesture a mixture of respect and relief. "Whatever you decide, we will support it. I will be there." She thinks about the baby, about her future room with light curtains, about a walk in the neighborhood with a stroller, about breakfast with bread and olive oil. The images are born simple, firm, like the foundations of a house. A shadow of unease, however, brushes against that peace. In economy class, Alvaro puts his mobile on the tray. He leans forward. He whispers with a stranger who nods with a look of concern. His fingers drum. His jaw tightens. A flight attendant who passes by catches snippets of phrases. Meetings, contact with lawyers, formal complaints. The vibration of the plane returns for an instant, brief, like a line that is underlined twice. Helena stops in first class and places a small envelope with the flight papers on Julian's small table. She asks if they need anything else. Clara thanks her for the care with a slight look. In her chest, the promise from a few minutes ago beats with strength, as if her internal rhythm had adopted a new metric. She wants to believe that that heartbeat will remain stable when they get to solid ground, when they arrive in the sleeping city and the real test begins. The air conditioning whispers. The digital clock in the cabin shows the time in red numbers. Clara looks at her father again and repeats in silence the phrase that has changed everything. The future does not look like a wall today. It looks more like a path lit by streetlights. She adjusts the blanket, touches her belly, smiles silently. At that moment, a flight attendant whispers to Julian, "Mr. Ortega, your son-in-law is threatening to sue the company and ruin it in court. He says he will not stand by idly." The calm of the flight is interrupted by the echo of a familiar voice that insists from the aisle, "Clara, this does not end here." The cry resonates forcefully, crossing the curtain that separates economy from first class. Some passengers raise their heads, surprised. Others sigh with annoyance, already accustomed to the tensions of that trip. Clara, who until that moment had managed to find a small island of serenity with her father, feels a shiver run down her spine. The baby in her womb responds with an abrupt movement, as if it also perceived the threat contained in that tone. Alvaro's complaints in previous chapters lead to his last attempt to regain control. Throughout the journey, his voice had filtered through in whispers, charged with resentment, in messages written in fury on his mobile screen. Now, unable to tolerate that Clara remained out of his reach, he decides to invade the invisible border that separates passengers. His figure appears in the aisle, with tense shoulders and wide eyes. He speaks too loudly, aware that everyone is listening. "Don't think this ends with a first-class seat." The goal of this chapter is to show Clara's definitive decision and the affirmation of family values, protection, forgiveness, and a shared future. Julian slowly gets up from his seat, with the calm of a captain who does not need to raise his voice to impose authority. "Mr. Gomez de la Vega," he says, "return to your seat." Tomas, who has discreetly taken a place in the aisle, advances a few steps and reinforces the order. The passengers watch with anticipation. Some turn on their mobiles again. Others murmur phrases of support for Clara. The setting is the softly lit first-class cabin. The atmosphere contrasts with the noise coming from the back. There, conversations are harsh. Complaints about delays multiply. Children cry from exhaustion. In first class, on the other hand, everything seems suspended in a tense bubble. where every word counts. Helena Morales positions herself next to the cabin door, watching the scene discreetly. Her presence adds a touch of feminine support, silent but firm. Everyday life also peeks through. An older passenger comments that she is traveling to Seville for the April fair, remembering that the party awaits her the next day. This cultural contrast reinforces the sense of normalcy that beats beneath the drama. The characters are clearly defined in this final section. Clara, firm, with tears of relief in her eyes, holds her father's hand. Julian, determined and serene, confronts Alvaro's intrusion. Tomas remains as a guardian of security, prepared to stop any excess. Helena, attentive, reinforces her support for Clara with her gesture, and Alvaro, frustrated, isolated, seems smaller and smaller in front of the collective gazes that disarm him. The plot progresses with 3 brief scenes. First, Alvaro tries to address Clara directly. "You are going to regret this farce." She does not answer. She only looks down at her boarding pass, as if all her strength were concentrated in that piece of cardboard. Second, Julian takes a step forward. He places a hand on the back of the neighboring seat and says in a firm tone, "She has already made a decision. Respect it." The people in the cabin nod. Someone even claps in silence. Third, Tomas intervenes professionally. "Sir, I ask you to sit down. If you persist, we will take action upon landing." Alvaro hesitates. He looks around and perceives that he has no allies. His power has been diluted in a plane full of witnesses. The climax comes in a simple gesture, but loaded with symbolism. Clara takes her mobile. She sees an intimidating message that has just arrived from Alvaro. Without reading it completely, she deletes it with a decisive movement. Her fingers tremble, but the brightness in her eyes shows determination. That gesture, observed by several passengers, becomes a declaration of freedom. Alvaro, realizing this, falls silent, lowers his head, and steps back a few paces. The constant roar of the engine accompanies that retreat, as if the plane itself was sealing the decision. The cabin slowly regains its calm. A passenger asks for a glass of water. Another adjusts his travel pillow. Helena approaches Clara and, with tenderness, offers her a small glass of warm milk. "It will feel good before landing." Clara accepts, grateful, and takes small sips. Julian sits down next to her again and murmurs, "You have been brave. I am proud of you." She nods, with tears that are no longer of fear, but of relief. Tomas confirms by radio that the situation is under control. From the cockpit, a co-pilot announces that in a few minutes, they will begin the descent into Barcelona. The air is filled with a mixture of fatigue and expectation. The passenger traveling to the April fair smiles and comments that everything will be fine, that holidays always bring good luck. The comment elicits soft laughter among the others, and for an instant, the drama seems to transform into a shared anecdote. The final moment arrives with an intimate gesture. Clara looks out the window. The city is illuminated under the stars, a tapestry of lights that draws avenues and squares. She places her hand on her belly and feels the baby's movement. She smiles silently, convinced that the future belongs to her. Julian watches her and understands that, although the road will be long, they will travel it together. Alvaro, isolated in the back, no longer has a place in that image. The plane begins its descent into Barcelona. Clara looks out the window and smiles. For the first time, she feels that the future belongs to her. In the contained silence of the cabin, as the plane began its descent over the illuminated city, there remained a feeling that something profound had changed forever. The young woman who had silently endured rigidity and control found the strength to say no. And that gesture, so simple and so decisive, opened a door that had been closed for too many years. At her side, the father who in the past had chosen to flee understood that it was still possible to repair with actions what had been broken with absences, and he knew that true redemption is not born of grandiloquent words, but of patience and silent presence. In the eyes of the witnesses, anonymous passengers who shared the journey, there was a sense of astonishment at seeing how a life could turn in an instant, not for a material triumph, but for the intimate strength of regained dignity. The lesson this story leaves us is clear. The love that knows how to ask for forgiveness and the courage that dares to raise its voice are capable of transforming a wound into hope. Because even in the midst of the most turbulent journeys, when fear seems to prevail, the certainty of an outstretched hand can sustain us. In the end, family is not always measured by the perfection of its past, but by the ability to start over. Like a lamp lit in the window during the night, a single gesture of kindness and courage can guide us through the darkest stretches of the road. Pause and think about the small acts of kindness that surround you every day, about the silences that can also be company, about the second chances that are still within your reach. If this story has moved you, share it with someone close to you. Perhaps in that conversation, another discreet light will be lit that continues to illuminate the value of dignity and the warmth of family. Because stories, just like journeys, find their meaning when they are not traveled alone, but accompanied by those who remind us that it is always possible to start anew.